Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Rausen Pereira. The human cost of the coronavirus outbreak is climbing across China and beyond. The economic cost is also mounting. That damage is for the most part not due to the virus itself, but due to efforts to prevent it from spreading. There are strict restrictions on moving out of Wuhan, where the outbreak began, a city with a population of 11 million. The lockdown, also now extended to other parts of Hubei province, prevents business-related travel as well as the movement of goods and workers. The impact is not confined just to China. International retailers have closed operations in China. Several overseas airlines have stopped flights to China, and international hotel chains have been offering refunds. And beyond that, there is growing concern about integrated international supply chains. Hyundai, of South Korea, has suspended its car production because of problems with the supply of parts from its operation in China, an early warning sign of possible extensive disruption ahead. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the impact of coronavirus on the global economy. Joining me on the program today are Nitin Desai, former Chief Economic Advisor to the Government of India, Jayant Das Gupta, former Ambassador of India at the WTO, and A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director of the Business Standard. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Desai, let me begin the program with you. Let's first try and understand and try and analyze, why is it so important, or rather, why is China so important for the global economy?
Because of its sheer size. Because when we had the SARS virus in 2002, it was maybe around 4 or 5% of the world economy. Today it is 15% of the world economy. It's a much more bigger element in the trade of other countries now in 2020 than it was 18 years ago. So for instance, in our case, our pharmaceutical industry depends almost completely on getting the active ingredients, importing active ingredients from China. So if there is a disruption of supplies from there, it will hit a very big chunk of Indian manufacturing, which is the pharmaceutical industry, hard. Besides, China has also emerged as a major market. Because of the growing prosperity there, it's a major market for the higher end consumer goods and so on, including luxury goods. And look at the sales of luxury cars and so on. So from that perspective, the potential impact of the coronavirus and what it does in China on the rest of the world is going to be quite profound. One can perhaps say that the sheer economic health costs may be more limited because everybody has acted very early to stop the flow. So there will be some, like what do we have? I think there are 3 cases. Yeah? We have 3 cases, and there will be a few. It can never be completely eliminated, but the economic costs, that is why I suppose people are seriously worried because of the sheer scale. Let me just mention one more thing. We have to be really watch out for the next couple of weeks. The virus broke out at the time of the Lunar New Year. So everybody was away from work. And now what they had was they extended that. And some of the states, some of the places have already extended it further. But now people will start coming back to work. And in that sense, the movement back of people will increase, and one would have to wait and see what that does to the spread of the virus. If that becomes significantly worse than what it is now, then we are in serious trouble. If it remains like what it is now, my guess is that in 3 to 6 months, things will sober down.
Okay, all right, Mr. Bhattacharya. So what is the scale of the impact really in China? How is it affecting economic activity within China itself? Because there's not much really coming out of China, but except for the fact that the companies from abroad have said, their operations have been hit and so on and so forth.
Well, let me begin from where Mr. Desai ended. I think, if you look at the daily reports of coronavirus victims, confirmed cases of coronavirus victims, from 21st January, the daily rate was around 200 cases every day. It kept rising, and on 4th of February, we saw daily confirmed cases reported at 4,000. But if you look at the data from 4th February onwards, till 8th February, which is the latest data available, it has now come down to around 2,700 cases. So there is clearly a case where you can see that the spotting or identification of confirmed cases of coronavirus is actually probably on a decline. Also, the comparison with SARS is very important here. The SARS, the mortality rate was almost 9%, whereas so far what we have seen in the coronavirus, the mortality rate is 2.1% or so. So I think and Chinese authorities have also been a little more forthright and prompt in raising an alarm internally as well as globally, so that every arm of the government as well as in other countries, they have reacted pretty fast. That's the positive side. The negative side of this is that 2 points I would make. One is that this happened at a time when the New Year, Chinese New Year economic activity actually sees a big jump. There is a single day sales that happen around this time. 50% of industries have shut down in Wuhan itself. There are about 4,000, Apple outlets in China. 2,000 have been shut down. Starbucks, a similar number, 50% of Starbucks. So clearly, such economic activities will take a big hit. If you want to look at the sectors, you will see clearly the travel and tourism sector will be the biggest hit, because so many countries have stopped their airline touching China. Even in India, you have seen Indian airlines have stopped their visits, flying the schedules to China. The second sector, the automotive, industrial sectors will also be affected, because China is one of the world's biggest global value chain centers. And Wuhan itself is China's second or third largest education hub. There are the top 10 universities in China, 2 are located in Wuhan only. So, which is why you saw there are so many Indians actually when many of them were not really working, they were studying there. So they had to come back.
Right.
So the impact of economic activities of range of sectors will be quite substantial. Estimates right now suggest there will be a 1 percentage point shaving of the economic growth. The first quarter they're expecting not more than 5%. Even some estimates are saying it will be less than 5%. Remember, last year it was 6%, or last quarter it was 6%.
Right.
So until the vaccines are out, till summer sets in, I would imagine economic activity will not be really bounce back to its original pace. One has to wait and watch what happens, but I think economy, and it has come at a time when the US had got into a kind of a trade deal, and look at the way the Chinese have responded. They've immediately slashed the tariff on US imports,
right,
because they realize that this is the time that you cannot play around with any trade diplomacy or trade war. So you pull down your tariff so that more goods can come in, because there is a shortage of products, everything. So on the whole, as a economy is going to be seriously hurt, and how you manage that damage is something that time will tell.
Right. All right. So, Mr. Dasgupta, so how is all of this going to impact integrated international supply chains? Now, that is also going to be a concern, isn't it?
Yes. China is, as was just mentioned, one of the leading suppliers of auto components, and it's going to affect the auto industry worldwide. As you mentioned, Hyundai has closed down a unit in South Korea. The Germans are badly affected. The US also imports a lot of auto components from China, so they are going to get affected. The second industry which is going to get affected is electronics and mobile phones, because China exports a lot to Vietnam, to other destinations. So that is going to get affected very badly. And if you come to think of it, electronic chips are there in all kinds of household goods today. So all these downstream industries which use chips made in China, for instance, they will get affected. The point about Chinese tourists also, they contribute about $250 billion annually. There are 173 million visits by Chinese tourists, and that has come to a stop for the moment. As far as the impact of this is concerned, how long will it continue? There are reports from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. They have carried out a mathematical modeling, and they say that it will reach its peak in the 3rd or 4th week of February. So it may continue for some more time. And as far as the global economy is concerned, shipping lines, for instance, have been affected, container movements have been affected. So it has been calculated that, if we take the global economy to grow at around 3.3%, according to some estimates, it will be shaved off by 0.3%, looking at the medium term scenario. So that is for the year. So it is going to affect a lot of industries. And as far as India is concerned, APIs, we import a lot from China. That is going to get seriously affected. Auto components we do import. So all the raw materials and intermediate products, components that we import for our own industry, they are going to get affected if it continues for very long. The last point I wanted to make is that there are certain industries which are overly dependent on Chinese material. For instance, Bangladesh, 85% of its foreign exchange comes from the garment industry alone, and it depends heavily on Chinese fabrics for producing the garments. And a lot of those garments are also coming into India. Now, if the supply chain gets disturbed, there will be a severe impact not only on Bangladesh, but on Bangladesh exports to India as well as the rest of the world.
Right.
So that is just the kind of impact it may have in various industries, across the world.
Absolutely. All right, let's focus on India a little bit now, Mr. Desai. Let's take the point that Mr. Dasgupta was making forward. How much of an impact is it going to have on India, and is there an opportunity for India as well?
I wouldn't think of it as an opportunity, because remember, basically the disruption of supply chains, it's not as if we are
insulated
in a position to replace China in chip supply or in any of these things. And I gave the example of pharmaceuticals, where our entire industry virtually depends on Chinese imports. So I would say that we have to probably live with that reality, focus a little on policies maybe which will allow people to build stocks. For instance, the pharmaceutical industry. When you can get it, create a situation where you give them loans through banks, etc., to build up stocks, so that the disruption of production is minimized. So I'd say that there are preemptive measures which we can take, but I won't see any of this as an opportunity, because the disruption of the world economy that this will bring about is going to cost us much more than any potential minor thing. You could say, yes, can we start supplying fabrics to Bangladesh to replace the Chinese fabrics? We could start examining all that, but I would say that will be very modest compared to the disruptions that we would suffer.
Okay, all right, Mr. Bhattacharya. So, what about the stock market and the other key indicators?
You talked about an opportunity, but I don't think there will be opportunities, but there will be a positive effect on India's external balances. The crude oil prices have already seen a decline, and it's quite a steep fall. And if coronavirus has a disruptive impact on global growth, the demand for crude oil will also be impacted. And therefore, I would imagine that the crude oil prices will remain pretty modest, and you need not see a kind of a spike that you had feared even just a month ago or 2 months ago. So therefore, from the external balance point of view from India, which is hugely dependent on crude oil, the normal assumption is that the crude oil price would be hovering at around between $65 and $70 per barrel, but right now it is well below 60. So therefore, from the external balance, from the import of crude oil, definitely in the Indian the external account will benefit, and the pressure on, I mean, we have no pressure on the external account right now, but I think it will be a benefit. And how the Indian government can capitalize on this, whether India can repeat what it did in 2014 December by using it to boost its finances, lower crude oil prices. So therefore, a part of the gains from lower crude oil prices, you pocket it in terms of higher revenues, tax revenues. Excise was raised at that time. So to what extent the fiscal management of the government responds to this, what will be a kind of a slowing down in the or the declining of the oil prices, is something that one has to see and watch. So that's, to my mind, is not an opportunity, but it is something that can give a boost to India's finances and the government finances. Having said that, one must also keep in mind that the exports, there are areas which, particularly in the IT sector, I think there are two of our big IT companies have a large presence in China. How they respond to this, whether there is something that these IT companies, particularly Infosys and NIIT, they respond to, is it a kind of not an opportunity but a scope that they get to expand their presence, because after this the virus dies down, there would be need for a lot of sort of reviving work. So one has to see how it goes out. Right. But I think the oil price remaining modest at this level is going to be a benefit for the Indian economy as such.
Sure. Okay. Let's look ahead then. Mr. Dasgupta, which countries are most likely to be impacted the most as a result of what's happening in China and the coronavirus issue?
Well, China has exports of about $2.5 trillion, and it exports to almost every country in the world. And whichever country is using its intermediate products or raw materials as for its own industrial purposes is going to get affected. That is one thing. The second thing is the Belt and Road Initiative also depends a lot on the physical transportation of cement, steel, other building materials. So that is also going to slow down. So the completion period, the Chinese may put in extra effort once this threat is passed. But the BRI itself will also get affected, and that will affect approximately 60 odd countries, to my mind. The third point is that even countries like Japan, for instance, China buys a lot of sophisticated capital goods from Japan. It also buys high quality cars and trucks and other equipment from Japan. So Japan is going to get affected. Korea is going to get affected. The ASEAN are very closely integrated in the value chain with China. So the ASEAN, I think, will be one region which will get affected the most in terms of overall impact. And as far as Europe is concerned, the US is concerned, no country will remain untouched by this, and there will be a slowdown in their own economies, and there will be job losses as well, especially for the smaller units, which will not be able to stock up on in time, because it's already there now, and it will have an impact on jobs as well. Especially, I wanted to mention this in Ohio and Pennsylvania, which are extremely important from the point of view of the US presidential elections. There are reports that it will affect jobs there in larger measure than in many other US states.
Okay, all right. Taking that particular aspect forward, because I was going to ask that question next. Mr. Desai, could what's happening in China impact the US economy to an extent where it could have a bearing on the election?
Well, the US companies which were in China had already started moving out a little because of the trade disputes that they had. So, if anything, the impact may be a little less than what it would otherwise have been. But I think we should not exaggerate this, in my view. If I go by the experience of SARS, yes, this problem will last maybe if the peak is in February, as the London School of Hygiene says, it will start tapering off, and by the mid-year you should start getting back to normal. And in fact, in the case of SARS, Chinese growth boomed after SARS. If you look at Chinese growth rates, the thing just zoomed up after SARS. So they are a well-organized country. If it leads to some fatalities, like a few thousand fatalities, no country is going to be finished by that in any way. So as long as the disruption of trade gets reversed within 3 to 6 months, I think they affected. Let me just here mention in a little passing, a slightly lighter note, that there is an asterisk comic, and in that asterisk comic there's a coronavirus who's a Roman villain, and that Roman villain, the metropolitan Roman villain, is defeated by asterisk at the end. So here also we had the asterisk will win out and the coronavirus will be defeated.
So the coronavirus character, even in the comic, in the Asterix and Obelix comics, also wears a mask. In the
I know. He's a chariot racer.
Yes, absolutely. But Mr. Desai, considering the, if we compare SARS and coronavirus, China, like you said, has grown many-fold since then and is a greater part of the global economy. So what happens in China then definitely has an impact on the rest of the world. So is it right to compare the two?
No, I'm not trying to compare it in that sense, but I'm saying it's a question of timing. That if this is something which is going to start tapering off from March onwards, then I think things will get back to normal. Look, we used to say in the old days that if America catches a cold, the rest of us get influenza. Now, in a sense, China is in that same league. That if those guys cough, we need nebulizers. You see, so I'd say that there is obviously this effect on other countries. But my feeling is that we really have to watch over the next month, and if it starts tapering off after February, in terms of new cases, etc., then you will see a relaxation of the travel restrictions, many other things come by April or so, and then you may well find that by the latter half of the year, things are more or less back to normal.
Right.
And given China's capacity for organization of emergencies, look at the way they built a hospital in 10 days.
Yeah.
Something which should normally take us 10 years here. But so I'd say that it will bounce back pretty fast.
Okay, all right. So what's the best way forward, Mr. Bhattacharya?
Well, the best way forward is to see in what way, from the Indian point of view, in what way we are better prepared. I think so far the Indian track record has been quite good. In the manner in which India evacuated its people, they were quarantined, the tests were conducted. We still don't know the final outcome of a large number. There are reports of some students may have come to India from Thailand. But I think so far the Indian authorities have responded very maturely and very, very well. Now that's positive. I think it is a good learning. And I think we need to invest more in such capacities, because this is not the first virus attack, and this will not be the last virus attack. So therefore, we need to be prepared for such things, such emergencies. Having said that, I will go back to my original point. If there are American companies are indeed going out of China after the trade war and all that, already out of around, there are about 800 example Apple suppliers in China. Now, almost there are about 300 of them have shut shop. Now, and this is directly linked to the coronavirus thing. Now, the question that the Indian Make in India kind of proponents should ask is that an opportunity of making the right gestures to large global companies who depend on these global value chains, that India can be not an alternative, at least an option for these large global companies to consider India as a global value chain, because the positive fallout of that kind of thinking will be long term and probably will help India be better prepared to take on decisions and take decisions like joining the RCEP and improving India's many foreign trade agreements with different countries.
Right. Yes, Mr. Desai, you wanted to add something?
No, I just wanted to add one thing, which he said earlier, which is that this does not seem to be as nasty a virus as SARS.
Mortality rate.
And this is what the head of AIMS also said, that in many cases these things can be fairly readily treated with a little care, and it's only certain classes of people who are vulnerable, old guys like me and so on, who have to, where this problem could arise. So I just thought that this is worth bearing in mind, that not to get too panicky.
Not to get too panicky, yes, absolutely. And Mr. Dasgupta, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
I think this is a global tragedy, and we should try to help the affected people in China as much as possible. And I note that the government has partially lifted its restrictions on the manufacture of masks and exporting to China, for instance. There should be greater cooperation, and of course it also opens up opportunities. We can't substitute for China, but if companies are looking for alternative destinations to invest in, to hedge their bets, then India should offer itself as an alternative destination for the future.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's it from me. See you again next time.